in terms of the Jinn surah, there was a very large lacuna in the text that just disturbs the reader, or should disturb the reader, and that's that the Jinn are reporting that that they used to have access to the councils of heaven. There were seating places for them in heaven, and then all of a sudden they're not allowed in heaven anymore. And every time they try to gain access to heaven, they're faced with these fiery meteors and these strong guards that are keeping them out of. So, what happened? Why did the Jinn lose access to heaven? That seems to be a central question of the text, and it's one that the text never answers. So the traditional interpretations say, well, when the revelation of the Qur'an came to humanity, there was no longer any need or desire for there be to some other access to divine information, so the door was shut. Now, the other way that the interpretation comes, and I didn't see that the commentators were really adequately dividing these two, and they're really different, is that the Jinn were never allowed in heaven, and they always came in heaven in a dishonest manner. And so perhaps God was not paying a careful enough attention, and then it came to his attention. Both of those solutions are external to the text. They're just not there. The text doesn't say anything. So in this case, looking at other situations in the Hebrew Bible where supernatural divine beings or liminal beings, or even prophets in one case, have access to heaven, or are denied access to heaven, well, I saw those as parallels that might give me some information about this glaring lack within the Surah Jinn.
I thought I'd just read a bit just to further illuminate this lacuna, or this absent explanation in Surah Jinn. First, just to remind everyone, Surah Jinn is Surah or chapter 72 of the Qur'an, and as you note in the book, it's not the only place where Jinn appear or are discussed, or where these particular motifs about the Jinn being excluded from the heavenly council appear in the Qur'an. But it's where you focus your study. And I'll just read here, this is Qur'an 72, Surah Jinn, verse 9. This is a translation of Qara'i, who says, this is the Jinn now speaking, we used to sit in its positions to eavesdrop, but anyone listening now finds a flame waiting for him. So it's there where the tension is. They give this explanation that something has happened, but they don't say what, and they don't say when.
But the translation, eavesdrop, is not in the text. Eavesdrop is in another text. It just says they had seating places.
Yes.
And so this is just the example of the harmonizing tendency that I protest, is that that the translator imported this eavesdropping idea, literally stealing a hearing, which one sees in another text but does not see in this text.
Yes, I think it's miqa'ad lis-sama'. So stations or places to sit for listening, but eavesdropping is more than that in English, of course.
Eavesdropping has a pejorative meaning.
Yes. Good,
really no pejorative meaning in there. The Jinn are fondly reminiscing about their previous access to heaven, which they no longer have.
Yes. Okay, so moving on to some of the biblical examples which provide a subtext for this. You mentioned, I think you said liminal beings. Was that right? Is that the word you used? So you have allusions to, I mean, I should just let you explain further, but you refer in part to the Genesis, the pre-flood antediluvian stories of Genesis, but also some other things from the prophets. So could you explain who are these liminal beings, and how do they shed light a bit on the situation of the Jinn in the Quran?
Well, the liminal beings in Genesis 6 are clearly some kind of angelic force, I suppose. They're just called, as you said, B'nai Elohim. And the reason they're significant is because we have a case where they violate, and this is what's missing from the Quran, is what did the Jinn do that was so bad that got them driven out of heaven, a place that they seem to belong earlier. So I'm looking at these places where other beings are punished or driven out of heaven. So we have Genesis 6, where the sons of God have sexual relations with the daughters of men, which seems to be kind of a violating a barrier between the divine and the human. And as a result of this, it destabilizes, in some sense, the world. And so chaos is introduced, and God destroys the world with a flood. You go even earlier, and you have Adam and Eve kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and they're prevented from going into the garden by a flaming sword and a fiery angel. And then you can go to these two really interesting Psalms, Psalm 58 and Psalm 82, which both speak, first of all, about Yahweh, the Israelite God, being part of a council of divine beings. And then some of the divine beings violate some kind of protocol. They rule unjustly, and Yahweh kicks them out of the divine council and condemns them to mortality. That's Psalm 58 and Psalm 82. And the most interesting one thing, I think, is 1 Kings 22, Micaiah ben Imlah, because he reports to these two kings who want a divine message, that he tells them the story of how he went up into the heavenly court and observed a debate that's taking place with Yahweh as the chairman of the board and these other figures that are called the hosts of heaven in one place, and other places, one of them is called the Spirit. And Yahweh says, this is what I want to do. And then various people come up, various of these spirits come up with suggestions. And then Yahweh picks one of them and says, go do it. And they plan on the operation. And Micaiah is observing this. He's in a listening place, which is exactly what the Jinn are. So I see these different events as somehow shedding light on the Quranic account and answering the question of what's missing. And what's missing is a war in heaven. What's missing is an active rebellion by figures that used to, in Arab cultural memory, be worshipped as gods and be approached for intercession. And now they're denied that access, and they're robbed of their power. So I see these other incidences of a war in heaven, which brings us to Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28, where both of these prophets at very different time periods are condemning a particular king, but they're using this mythological language of a war in heaven to describe it. So those are the passages which describe how Lucifer, which light bearer, is cast out of heaven, and that's used to just describe the fate of the king. And even in the New Testament, Jesus, in a very cryptic saying, says, I saw Satan cast out of heaven like a star falling from the sky. Just no expansion, but there it is. So this seems to be something that's really embedded in the memory in that period, and it comes out in the Jinn story. And there's only there are a few hints of it in the surah itself, but I only noticed them because I brought the biblical accounts in to dialogue with them, and they are, or the most obvious one is at the very end of the incident. The surah goes on after that, where it talks about all of these beings crowding around the prophet and almost smothering him. And it's unclear what's going on, but in the context of the surah, it seems to me what's going on is the Jinn are surrounding him and threatening him. And
this is verse 19, right?
Yes,
72:19. Yes,
and that becomes kind of a mythological explanation of the Jinn being cast out of heaven. And then there's other things about the Jinn trying to escape, and of course the subjugation of the Jinn at the very beginning when they hear the Quran being read, and they submit. But anyway, that's how the biblical account seems to illuminate some of the what I would call, well, missing pieces gets people nervous, but the gaps, which I think are the important features of the text.
I mean, at a serious risk of self-promotion, it does seem to be close to some of the ideas I've argued for about the Quran. I mean, the subtitle of your book is The Quran in Conversation with the Bible. And, I've similarly argued that the Quran, in order to articulate Astaghfirullah. In order to articulate its argument, very often it counts on the biblical knowledge of its audience, and so it maybe not thoughtfully, but it's able to leave things unstated. But can I just ask for a bit more on your take of 72:19 in Droge's translation, which you quote, and that when the servant of God stood calling on him, that's him with a capital H, so God, they were almost upon him with a lowercase h, so the servant of God, in hordes. That translation might be close to the way you take that verse, because if I'm not mistaken, you see a sort of antagonism or threat upon the prophet with the jinn sort of surrounding him. Is that right?
Yes. Talk more about it. First of all, you mentioned that my wife is Saudi, and she gave me some insight into that word. That in modern Arabic, it's used sometimes for the curls of wool or like a cloud. So it's kind of an encroaching thing, and so there's a threat involved. Now, the first thing you have to, in order to interpret it this way, you have to decide that the servant of God is in fact mentioning the prophet, and I think that's fairly certain, because the beginning they hear the Qur'an, and then this seems like now it's the prophet who's chanting the Qur'an. Some interpreters say that it just means believers in general, but I don't buy that. And so it's a threatening thing. So it's the closest they get to this picture of a divine hostility, a war between the jinn and the old religion, you might say, and the prophet representing the new religion. And where I go with this is that the jinn are kind of an embarrassment to Islam, because they're like these independent spirit beings, but it's so deeply embedded in the Arabic consciousness. I mean, I have in-laws who just talk to jinn, but so in order to not eliminate one thing, they could just have said that the jinn don't exist. They're figments of imagination, but they don't go in that. That's not how they go in this particular passage. Instead, they just they deracinate the jinn. They take away all their power. They make them, in a sense, meaningless. You can't, if you come to them for intercession, they're just going to confuse you, because they don't have any more access. They don't know anything more than you do. And the jinn become Muslim just like humans become Muslim. They're taken off the playing field, so to speak. They're no longer a threat to Tawhid, to Islamic monotheism, and that's where I end up in the story. Is that's the effort they're making? It's just to completely take them off the field. They're not significant. We're not going to say they don't exist, because it's so deeply embedded, but they're not significant any longer.